Hello everyone. I'm so glad everyone could join me today. I want to start off by saying I brought much nicer clothes than this, but the airport lost my luggage, so I'm instead got myself a nice tourist jacket. And by the airport lost my luggage, I mean it's probably my fault, but it might not be. So I might get it back, I might not. Today I'm going to introduce, it was very brief, the introduction, so I'll go over more in detail my case and what brings me here. And then I'm going to share with you all a personal story from my transition that I think might shed some light onto what it's like to be a transgender youth. So, in the summer before my sophomore year of high school, I came out to my parents as a transgender boy. And I expressed to her that it wasn't going to be possible to live in two worlds and be Gavin at home and someone else at school. So we approached my school in a very conservative, small Virginia town in America, and asked that I be respected. We said I'm going to be returning to school as Gavin. My name had been legally changed. I was starting my transition, and we basically said, like, this is who he is, what are you going to do for us? And my principal was fantastic. He assured me that everything would be fine, there would be no issues, I would be protected, I would be respected, and he would make sure of that. And he stuck to his word very well. He did everything he could for me. He tried his best, but ultimately his hands were tied when people higher on the chain of command decided to do differently. So when I went back into school for my sophomore year, everything was fine. I didn't really have any physical or verbal altercations. I used the boys' bathroom for a period of about 7 weeks. I didn't immediately ask permission because I was very afraid of my very conservative peers, but I realized I didn't have anything to fear. And so I asked permission after that point. And for 7 weeks, that was fine. Nothing happened, no issues. Plenty of rumors that, it became popular to claim you had an encounter with me in the bathroom, but none of them were actually true, which is a really bizarre thing to get brownie points for. I saw that guy in the bathroom and I talked to him. Cool. It was really a bizarre phenomenon. So despite all the rumors and the stories, nothing really ever happened. And then, less than 24 hours before the school board meeting for September of that year, there's one every month, my mother was alerted to the presence of a Facebook post going around in our community to all the parents. And it basically said, it communicated a call to action of such incredible urgency, the lives of your kids were at stake type urgency, because this girl was trying to be in the boys' room and everyone needed to show up and make sure that didn't happen. The conversation was absolutely vile. It was a long string of comments and shares and that all identified me as a freak, a weirdo, a girl. People would go out of their way and in fact say sentences improperly to make sure they snuck in an extra female honorific when referring to me. And so that was really volatile, but it alerted us to the kind of bigger issue, which was that the very next day, the school board was going to be facilitating a public discussion about my genitals and the use of the bathroom. So my mother and I did some research. She collected a massive packet about various things from the legal protections surrounding transgender student rights to the suicide rates of students who are not protected and kids that aren't supported. So she produced all of these papers to the school board, and ultimately what happened was the vote was postponed. By the time the next school board meeting rolled around, which was the following month, it had gotten a lot worse. There was enough time for people to sit and stew on it, and the conversation had happened, it had traveled farther, and I think there was probably twice the attendance and 3 times the vitriol. That was actually where I was publicly called a freak. I was likened to an animal on more than one occasion. In one case, likened to a dog using a fire hydrant. Just absolutely bullied, and it was really, really terrible and disgusting. And the school board did nothing to mitigate the hatred thrown at who was then a 15-year-old child. And that day, the school made the decision to give me the option of either a neutral unisex, one of 3 neutral unisex restrooms that they had constructed from broom closets, which carries an irony that I expect won't be lost, which I hadn't asked for, and which might have been labeled Gavin's bathrooms, because everyone knew who they were for. So they said, you can use those or you can use the girls' room. Which, I mean, I can't imagine what kind of outcry there would have been had I taken that invitation and started using the girls' room. And these bathrooms as well, they were stated publicly to have been ready on the day of that announcement when they banned me from the boys' room, and in fact they weren't ready for another week or so. So I had effectively no real bathroom in the school for about a week, and then really none after that anyway. Sometime between these 2 meetings during this time period, I got in contact with the American Civil Liberties Union, which is an American law group that advocates for the rights of, in general, the Constitution, but they historically have taken on many minority rights cases, including LGBT rights. And so we got together, and I made the decision to bring a lawsuit against my school for discrimination. 3 years later, the rest of my school career and going into the beginning of college now, it's not over. There's no resolution. I'm graduated, I'm gone, but the case is still very much alive and active. It could conceivably not be over for another 2 or 3 years. These things take a very, very long time, and there's a lot of red tape to go around. But in the meantime, I've been doing things like this, traveling and giving talks and reaching out to schools, especially with like youth activism, and talking to middle and elementary schools and high schools as well. As where the case at what level it stands now, it's at the local court level, which is the lowest level, and at one point it had traveled up to the Supreme Court, which is the highest level. And it could very well get back there again. So that all established, that little introduction established, I'd like to share with you all a kind of a personal story. Excuse me, and perhaps a sneeze. And this story is about how I got my name. It's quite a bit more than that, and it could be introduced as like the sort of the day my life turned around, or the like dichotomy between supporting your child and not supporting your child, or whatever. But I usually introduce it as turtle cake name story. And I promise there's a reason for these things to be here. When I came out to my mother, it was ahead of my 15th birthday. She, first of all, insisted that she had to choose my name. She would not allow me to do so. And then second of all, she swore me to secrecy from the rest of the family, especially with regards to my father, who, in her words, was not yet used to the lesbian thing. Because at that time, I've masculine assumed female who very much liked women, and that was very well established in my house, and it was something my father would not talk about. So I'm out to my mother, and my 15th birthday is approaching, and I realize my twin brother's 15th birthday is approaching. He's not trans, and I realize that I'm not going to live through being the birthday girl again, and I don't really have options because I'm not allowed to be the birthday boy. And so me and my mother have a few fights. I'm being selfish, I'm being impatient, I'm asking for too much too soon, that sort of thing. And so on the night before my birthday, I had gone to bed sort of catatonic. I was just more deeply miserable than I can really ever recall being. So I get up the next morning, and surprisingly, I'm feeling exactly that way. So I kind of slug out of bed, and my mom takes one look at me and one look at my like half-dead state and says, "Oh, I knew you were determined to ruin this day for everybody." So I mean, that was upsetting, you know. I wasn't determined to ruin the day for everybody. It was my birthday. You know, it's supposed to be my day. I'm supposed to be able to, you know, be a bit particular or demanding on my birthday. It's my birthday. So I walk over, and we always get like a sheet cake made from Walmart. I don't know what the equivalent of Walmart in England would be, but you know, it's just a plain white, some squiggle colors on the side, and it's happy birthday, whatever. But she had decided, knowing that I am a boy, and knowing that it would hurt me, or perhaps not knowing, perhaps not thinking about it at the time, but instead of just doing a happy birthday, she had them put my brother's name on it as well as mine, except for it wasn't my name, it was the name I was given at birth. So it was my female name. And I lost my mind. I screamed, and I had a fit like I've never had before. You couldn't have just left it off. You couldn't have just given me that courtesy. If you're going to put me through this, you couldn't have at least left the name off the cake. Meant not to get emotional here. So, and here's where it gets worse. I decided it's not my birthday, and I was going to go upstairs and come down afterwards, and that would be my last night, and it would be my last birthday. And all my family, my extended family, who are also coming, by the way, conservative, religious people. Some of them we no longer speak to, although I feel personally that the garbage has sort of taken itself out in that respect. But you know, the backlash was going to be severe from the people that were coming. Or at least that was how my mom perceived it, and truly that was the case. But really, the problem was my father. It was just she could deal with them. She doesn't have to live with them. But she was just so afraid of my father's reaction. So, you know, I have that meltdown. I scream at my mother, "How could you do this to me? This isn't my birthday. I'll be upstairs when it's over." And maybe 20 minutes later, knock, knock, knock on my door. And something to know about my father and me, and also about our relationship. We don't, like, talk about anything, but especially not about feelings. So, knock, knock, knock. "Who is it?" He sticks his head in the door. Your mom's telling me you're having some problems, buddy." And I'm like hostile because I'm miserable and I'm having my last day on earth and the worst day of my life. And I don't have a good relationship with him, and especially, like I said, not one where we talk about feelings. So my instinct is to say, "Get away from me, go away, don't speak to me." But I realized I can use this. So I said, "Yeah, well, Mom said I'm not allowed to tell you why." So now it's not my problem, it's Mom's problem. So he disappears, and 10 minutes later, he's back again, and he's exactly as awkward, but his face is much paler. And your mom's told me what's going on. I don't get it, but I love you. So my father leaves my room, and I'm still miserable. I mean, that was a positive turn, but it's not terribly easy to come back from the brink like that. And when you're that sad, and when things are happening that are horrible, even positive things don't always fix you. And they don't always fix your pain. And also, the fact remained that while my father did know, I was still very likely going to be the birthday girl where the rest of my family was concerned, because they were already on their way, pink cards and everything. So I stayed up in my room, intending to come down when it was over and deal with the new reality of being Gavin with my father as well at that time. But then my mom calls me downstairs. And I'm hostile again, because especially with her, I was bitter. I was like, "Look, you've put me in this position. I don't want to talk to you. You know, there's no good news is possible here at this time." And so she beckons me over and tells me to go look at the cake. And I walk over, and she has wiped off the wrong name. And in green gel icing that I know is at least 2 years old, from like the deepest, darkest, stickiest recesses of our cabinets, she's written Gavin on my cake. So she tells me that she called up all the family, said, burn the pink cards. Do not even step onto our property if you don't accept him. His name is Gavin. He's a boy. Leave if you don't like it. We'll see you at Christmas. So everyone starts filtering in, and everyone is suddenly exactly like my father, not knowing what to say, not really speaking to anybody about anything. Oh, my mother's name, Dee, the decorations are wonderful. Thanks, I did it this morning. And just really awkward, tight, small talk. And then my brother comes down the steps. He'd been up in his room, completely unaware of the, lifestyle change that he had just underwent. And he comes downstairs, and people are here, and he walks over to the cake, and he looks at the cake, and he goes, why is the turtle's name on the cake? So at this point, I should mention, we have a turtle named Gavin. My mom swears she did not know this when she selected my name. Swears she didn't know it. I swear I'm named after a turtle. So my brother comes down, telling all of my conservative, confused, awkward family members that the turtle's name is on the cake. And they don't want to engage at all, so they're just like, not desperate to know what to do because they don't. And so my mom catches him doing this, and she elbows me, and she's like, hey, look, this one's your problem. I got the rest, you have to deal with him. So I take him aside in the other room, and I said, hey, look, it's not the turtle's name. That's my name. I'm a boy. And he just looks at me like with the blankest expression I've ever seen on a person who's trying to compute information and goes, no, you're not, and then runs out the room. But he didn't mention the turtle again. So I very obviously did not end my life that night, as was my plan, because my mother decided that day that her personal feelings about what other people would think, or her feelings about what my father would think, were nothing compared to the health and safety of her child. Despite, having possibly being one of the reasons that my life ended that night, she was the reason that I continued to live. And from then on, she has been the most steadfast supporter of me in everything I do, whether it was my advocacy, my fight, or my move across the country from Virginia to California. She is an absolute warrior, and despite losing some of our family members, who really matters has stuck with me since that time. So I hope you guys enjoyed watching me cry about my name on stage. I really had a blast sharing this story, and I thank you all for taking the time to listen to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us here today to share your story with us all. So to kind of kick off some questions before we take some more from the audience. After suing your school board, you started a heated national debate. And actress Laverne Cox said that you were someone who everyone should know. When you first sued the school board, did you ever imagine that something like this could happen?
No. I didn't actually think it was going to go to court before I sued. And at that, I didn't actually think it was going to make any kind of news. I assumed perhaps the local news. And a week later, the appetite would have disappeared, and it would have not been a problem anymore. And I also assumed that a threatening letter from a legal organization would have been enough for them to give it up, but that wasn't the case, of course. And it was not even, it wasn't like I was even in the mind space to muse about, what if this happens? I guess it's possible. It wasn't even a thought in my mind. It was like a different language that I didn't know how to think in. So no, absolutely not. I didn't expect that.
And what was the response like when you first sued the school board?
there was a period where people had to warm up to the concept because the first reaction of a lot of people was anger, the kind of the attitude of, well, I don't have a problem with transgenders, but why do you have to ask for your rights? That's me imitating my Southern conservative peers back in Virginia. So people had to get used to the idea that people were allowed to push for their rights before I could really get an adequate understanding of the climate. But there was a lot of backlash. Plenty of people ultimately decided that people should not be asking for their civil rights. And then some people, even that were supportive of my transition, remained of that opinion and decided that they no longer wanted to interact with me. But I also had a massive volume of support that continues today, that's very pronounced, and even within my community was very pronounced.
How did you find coping with those negative responses? What was it that kept you going?
I grew up bullied really horribly, and so I'm used to people saying things that you wish they wouldn't and making things up or just going after personal things. So I think I was just so used to it, unfortunately, that it didn't faze me. It was more of the same. But also having a purpose, having a mission and a statement and a reason to be doing what I was doing, further enabled me to not worry about what the opposition was saying.
Okay, and the current political climate in America means that emotions are understandably running high for many people. What would your message to people who feel oppressed and upset by the current situation be?
That's just such. It's hard to communicate how it feels being an American right now with our administration. It feels like an episode of Black Mirror or The Twilight Zone. It's really horrific in a way that's very hard to describe and explain. This is the administration we're seeing now is a coordinated attack against the rights of anybody who doesn't fit into a box of being a wealthy, straight white man. And it's really hard to combat this when all of our government, for the most part, is Republican controlled, which is the people who are trying to take away the civil rights of people. And so I guess my advice would be to do everything you can to unify. A coordinated effort is better than a couple of scattered ones. So unify, communicate, and be diligent and not and be tireless. Don't give up and don't apologize for your actions because lives are on the line, and I mean that truly.
Yeah. And in some senses, going to court over the use of the bathrooms was about more than just the bathroom itself. What do you think can be done to challenge public perception, not just in the States but worldwide, over trans rights more broadly?
I think one of the most effective tools I've had has been having a sort of more human face to the conversation, because a lot of people's understanding about trans people starts and stops at the late night television show joke of a man with a beard and a dress. So I think getting to know trans people on a personal level to dispel some of the very, 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 very basic pieces of misinformation out there would be helpful. Perhaps one of the broad arguments is that when you allow trans people into spaces that they've already existed in for a very long time, you just don't know it yet. Rates of crime will go up, sex crime, teen pregnancy, whatever. That has never happened. We don't have the data to support that anywhere where trans people are allowed to have the same rights as anyone else. And I think we need to talk about that a bit more, because the arguments at the end of the day, they're unfounded, they hold no water. But I think that, along with just humanizing trans people and normalizing trans experiences, is very important.
Okay. And how do you think your case that you brought forward kind of matters to non-trans students too?
I I think it matters first in the concept of people that have trans friends that they want to graduate with and that they want to have around in their lives, which is a very important part of the conversation because, you know, trans people are part of everyday life. You have, you know, trans friends, family members, not everybody of course, but friends, family members, work, like people that work in the shops that they go to. You don't realize, I suppose, how much a part of normal life trans people are. And when they're gone, there's a gap that's felt. But then also, aside from that, just being in a schooling environment that's more accepting and broadly more open to the rights of every human being is just ultimately a healthier environment than one that is exclusionary and conservative and hateful.
What do you think kind of the everyday person can do to help bring these issues to light?
I think just don't stand for transphobia, casual or aggressive. When someone makes a passing comment, don't let them get away with it. And you don't have to necessarily be policing everybody to be effective at this. Just, you know, people have misconceptions, people have a lack of information. And I've encountered plenty of very, you know, people that are fine people that just have a fundamental misunderstanding of who trans people are. And once that is cleared up, they're fine. You know, they're no longer fearful, they're no longer confused. It's just that they weren't perhaps willing to do that education by themselves. So just, you know, live by example, live in a way that is educational to others, and don't stand for transphobia, especially against trans people directly.
Okay, and one final question from me before we move on to some from the audience. What's next for you?
I would love to go to school. I'm pending a response about a scholarship before I decide where I go, but I would love to go to school. I want to be a middle school English teacher.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, I think now is probably the perfect time then to open up some questions from the audience. If you've got a question, raise your hand and we'll get a microphone over to you. Yeah, I see a question just at the front over here. Yeah, so I'll just bring the mic over.
So you say the legal battle's ongoing and you say that you've got masses of public support, but do you to some extent feel as though you're fighting this alone, or are there other people in a similar situation that you could maybe club together with? I realise it's a million miles away from a sort of class action, but are there other people that you can draw on or sort of get more support legally from?
A bit. If I'm going to be completely honest, I do feel a bit as though I'm the only one dealing with this. I'm not the only one dealing with discrimination within my school, and I'm not the only one dealing with legal battles regarding that discrimination. But I'm, at this time, the only one who has had the experience that I've had with the case going as far as it has and going as long as it has. And while I would not wish this on anybody else in the world, it does get lonely because I have very specific complaints and grievances that I need to vent about that just don't translate outside of this context. You know, everyone wants to be sympathized with or empathized with, and when you just have an experience so bizarrely unlike anything anyone else has, it's difficult. And so there are times when I do feel a bit alone about my experience because I can't compare notes, you know? But I don't feel that terribly often because ultimately what's stronger is the community that I have around me, and also I wouldn't wish for anyone else to go through this. So despite the loneliness of being the only one doing this, I think it's, you know, better someone that's already dealt with this for this long than someone new have to go through it. Thank you.
I guess one more question for me would be, what do you do in your free time when you've been fighting the battle for so long? What do you like to do when you're not kind of dealing with the legal stuff? I mean, you know, other than sort of daily life things that everyone has to do, I actually sort of make time in my day to spend time with my cat. Like, it's such a therapeutic thing to do. So I specifically carve time out of my days for that, which is the only reason I'm mentioning it, because everybody spends time with their animals.
But then also I'm just intensely social. I love people. I just really love people, all types of people. I love hearing stories. I love people watching. I love being in social events. I love being around people. So I love to explore. I love to just go and sit and listen to stories. The first place I went when I got here, I went to the Eagle and Child.
Yeah.
Child and Eagle, one of the two.
Eagle and Child,
Eagle
yeah.
and Child. And I sat and I had fish and chips and listened to an English guy talk to his friends, explain to his friends about what American politics were. And I just sat like grinning over my drink, because it was like the most surreal, bizarre experience to hear like an English person describe American politics to other non-American people. And he wasn't terribly wrong either. So it was just, just experiences like that, just being in the moment with other people, even if you're not with them.
Yeah.
I like doing that a lot. And then I also really like Pokemon. I have since I was like 3, and I'm still a geek about it. And it's just, but I think most of what I do revolves around socialization and finding friends in that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I see a question just at the front over here. Yeah.
Do you get contacted often by people who you've maybe helped inspire or helped also maybe they've been discriminated against, and help them get the confidence to come forwards?
I do, and that is probably because it's stressful to do all this. Even traveling and sharing my story can be very stressful. For example, the airport lost my luggage, or I lost my luggage, unclear. When things get stressful and I feel like it's just so much of a slep to do these things, one of the things that really energizes me and keeps me going is stories like that. I've heard from younger children that have come out because I gave them the language. I've heard from older adults who transitioned in their 50s or 60s because I gave them the language. I heard from a woman like last week who said, look, I thought if some kid in conservative rural Virginia could do it, I could do it. And so she came out as a woman to her wife and told me that it went well. And so things like that are so fantastic. And I do hear that fairly often, and as well from kids my age who say that they came out to their school, or they were empowered to fight their school, or that their school took action because of the ACLU. Like, for example, they would read the ACLU's court arguments or briefings or the amicus briefs in support of me, and so schools decided to enact a supportive policy, because of that. So I do hear from things like that, and they bring me a lot of joy.
And so why the decision perhaps to become an English teacher and not go further and maybe start sort of charities and outreach to sort of get a sort of wider access?
I feel like being an English teacher is that. Being a teacher in general is that. I do want to continue with my activism and my outreach and that in my career or in the future, but I do also have to have a career that's going to have a roof over my head. And I like kids a lot, and middle school is such a volatile, important time in children's lives where they're figuring out who they are, and it's like also a really commonly important phase of life for trans kids. And I grew up with not having the language, never hearing the word gay in a positive light, never hearing the word trans in any light, even in school, and being bullied and not having that support. So I think as a middle school teacher, I would be able to reach those kids and be the type of teacher I didn't have. And through English specifically, I love the topic, but also I feel like it's much more expressive than, say, science. I can't convince my earth science kids to do a journal for me every day, but as an English teacher, I can make them. I think that the relationships you can build are better and more supportive in that context. And also I like the subject. Thank you for your questions.
I see a question just over there. Yeah. In the aisle. Yeah. Yeah, she just grabbed the mic. So that's okay. Yeah.
On a very related topic, actually, are there any trans authors or trans literature in general that you find inspiring or helpful for those who maybe are like new to understanding the subject, or even like media more generally? I mean, there's a lot of increasing representation of trans people. I mean, not hugely, but increasingly so. And do you find any of that resonates with you?
So, as far as like young adult literature, I've yet to read a book I didn't think wasn't great, which is unfortunate, because the situation is when it's like a niche subject, there's like, let's say 10 books about trans youth written for trans youth. If you've only got 10 books, there's not a great odd that one of them is going to be beautiful. And I'm a picky reader, I feel. So I don't think there's any good young adult books at all right now that I've read. But there's plenty of instructional books made by educators and professionals that I think are great. Actually, when I came out to my mom, my original plan had been, I had downloaded, if anyone remembers the Nook, or if anyone perhaps still has a Nook, I downloaded a PDF about what it means to be transgender on that Nook, and my plan was just to hand it over and let her deal with that. Couldn't find it, of course, when the time came. Still haven't found it. Don't know where that thing is. But that was, things like that I think are very helpful. One book in particular that helped my mom early on was called, I think it's called The Transgender Child, A Guide for Professionals, Educators, and Parents. I could be wrong about that. And then another one by a woman named Michelle Angelo. She's an educator and a professional who wrote a book about trans youth, and that's gorgeous and really good, and I wish I had the titles on hand to promote her. But I think most of the good literature and media are going to be things written by professionals at this time, unfortunately.
I see a question just at the front here. Yeah.
How is your relationship now with your brother, like with your twin? Do you find he was quite accepting, like after it? Because you said at the start he kind of just said, no, you're not. Like, are you quite close now, or?
My brother is, so we are very, very, very different. He has always been more of a follower. He's who anyone wants him to be. He's a people pleaser. He behaves as who he's hanging around with and who he'll find acceptance with. And that, comes from so many different things growing up in the South and in a smallish town. But as a result, most of his influences, especially because, like I said, we grew up with a conservative family, so most of his influences, or all of his, for the most part, defining influences have been of a conservative nature. And he's himself much better now, but he was not terribly accepting. It wasn't ever given to him as an option to not accept me. That was not an option for him. My mother, had divorce papers ready if my father wasn't going to be on board. Like, just had them ready. So that wasn't something he was allowed to do. But he did still express distaste in his own ways, perhaps being a bit more aggressive, or perhaps speaking to me less, or refusing to be seen with me in public because all of his friends were like conservative rednecks, and they gave him a lot of crap for being related to me. Now he's a bit better. He's still very concerned with what other people think, and he's still running with sort of the same crowds, but he's grown up a bit, and is better at understanding and expressing and processing emotions like those. So our relationship has improved, but I don't think I would say that even now we're terribly close. But we have an amicable relationship.
Okay. Was there a question just there? Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, what went through your mind when you first realised that you were going to have to contest this in court?
think I've like blocked it out. I do remember I went in with like no expectation of what that was going to look like. I didn't have any real understanding of the legal system, and I was very nervous. But also, I still at the time thought it was going to be resolved very quickly. We bring it to the first level and it's over. And so I think it happened very slowly, like that kind of realization and getting used to that as it advanced further and further and further and further. But it was daunting and exciting in the sense that I could set a very, very positive legal precedent, but daunting in the sense that I'm going to court. But I think that full realization and that full experience came over the course of several months as the courts, like the case, moved through the system.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions, so if we go to the hand just there, yeah.
So sometimes it seems that discrimination stems from ignorance, but then when we try and educate people and we call them out, often people get aggressive. Do you have any idea how we can carry on educating people? So obviously discrimination isn't always ignorance. Sometimes it's genuine maliciousness.
Right.
But how do we do it beyond, getting people young, pushing the message and so on?
I think something that needs to be understood is that you're not going to reach everybody. When you have a person who is, let's take, for example, again, just someone from my hometown. They've been raised in a way that is very, very conservative, not really in line with factual information. And so to raise somebody of that mindset without a huge factual basis for a lot of what they believe, it's a cultural brainwashing almost. And so when you try to produce facts later in life, when they weren't raised and when they didn't develop by reasoning with facts, when you try to produce these later in life, they don't penetrate. It's not that they take the fact in and still reject it. It doesn't get that far, and people get very frustrated, and so they push harder, and they perhaps in response get more aggressive. But it's just simply true that there's some people that are just not going to be reachable. And so I think our energy should be spent on the people who are more open to conversation, and with regards to the people that aren't ever going to be, yay, trans people, try to focus more on explaining, well, you can have your beliefs and everything, but it costs no energy and no time and no money to just be respectful. And I think I've found some success having those conversations with even peers of mine who don't like me. I've told one in particular, I said, look, you calling me Gavin isn't you promoting transitioning anything. It's just being respectful, and it costs you no energy. It in fact is more difficult for you to be oppositional at this point than anything else. So you can just go ahead and drop it. You don't have to do this, and it worked. He said he dropped it and moved about his business, and it was old news eventually for him. But I think really something that we need to understand is that you're not going to reach everybody, so you need to focus on those who you can.
Thank you. Just a question over there, yeah.
So Oxford is really strong, I think, for its LGBTQ community, and I'm just interested to know what it's like in California, if you've found a strong LGBTQ community, or just kind of what it's like on the ground.
Where I live, I've been told that there's parts of California that are dangerously conservative, but where I live is a beautiful little bubble. It's the Bay Area, Berkeley, and it's more abnormal to not see something like a trans flag or a gay flag or like a refugees welcome sign. It's more abnormal to not see such a decoration on a storefront or at a building than it is to see it. And so while I haven't found a particular friend group or community interpersonally with that yet, that's thriving where I live. It's just one of the most LGBT friendly spaces I've ever encountered.
Great. Let's see, one question just over there, yeah.
Do you have a good relationship with the people in your hometown? Do you still visit, or do you find that it's still unwelcoming there? I have a very, very close-knit friend group that I love very much and interact with
regularly, and I've yet to be back to Virginia for a visit. I'm going next month. But I mean, when I visit, I'm visiting for like those friends and my mother, and probably my cats as well. Not necessarily for the community, but there are aspects of it that I miss and enjoy and want to engage with when I visit.
I think one final question just at the front over here. Yeah.
So how, in terms of raising awareness, obviously one way of doing that is through top positions in, say, for example, the media or in government. How far away do you think we are from seeing trans representation in those areas of society?
Well, the recent elections, not the presidential, but some of the recent elections on the state level were actually very good for that. In Virginia, even, a woman named Danica Roem won. She's a trans woman. I think there were 2 or 3 other trans women who won spots, and 1 or 2 trans men. I don't recall truly, just especially Danica. But I mean, we're seeing that now. We're seeing trans people get to levels of public representation and in government and be part of that conversation. When do I think we're going to be at a conceivable level to have the first transgender president? When do I think we're going to have transgender, like Supreme Court judges, that kind of thing, in the higher up where it really counts? Or no, I mean, it really counts on the, but let's not talk myself into a hole here. In highly visible spaces. I don't think that's tomorrow. Please let me be wrong. But I think we're moving there. I think we're absolutely moving there. I think less and less it's important in the conversations of candidates, what their, who they are, what their gender is, what their beliefs are, that kind of thing, or personal, that kind of thing. Although unfortunately we did see a very massive step back recently with that.
Do you think it could have a kind of snowballing effect where once people start to see trans people and minorities in general in positions of representation, they start to think that, oh, perhaps we can engage and perhaps they're not that different from us after all, and it kind of accelerates the whole process?
Absolutely. I think once you meet someone as a person and their accomplishments stand out, their reputation precedes them as far as what they do, it's so much easier to engage with that person regardless of who or where they are. And so yes, once we have a more prominent minority presence in politics, that'll just be a normal part of the conversation.
Thank you. So I think that's unfortunately all we've got time for this afternoon, but if everyone could please join me and say a huge thank you to Gavin for joining us here today.